Hey folks, I'm back with round 8 from the 2021 North American Open. So unfortunately, this would be my final round in the tournament. I ended up withdrawing afterwards, and so this will be the final video in this series. But stay tuned until the end if you want to hear some of my final wrap-up thoughts on the tournament and maybe some thoughts moving forward. So in this game, I was paired against Gnel Melikyan, who is, I believe, a junior player around like 17 years old, and 2100 FIDE, but 2320 USCF, and yeah, probably going to go way higher, because after this game, I felt like he was a very underrated player and really, really strong. So the game started off as d4, knight f6, c4, g6, and of course we get a King's Indian. Now I did get one Grunfeld in this tournament, so not every game was a King's Indian, but it's kind of funny because I looked at my opponent before the game a bit, and he was mainly, from what I saw, playing the Queen's Gambit declined and Slav, so pretty much everything with like d5, and I didn't see any King's Indian games, so this was definitely a surprise for me. But I didn't mind it too much because I feel like, you know, if someone doesn't have a ton of experience in the King's Indian, it's like even if they prepare for the game, it's still, you know, going to be a really sharp and complicated position. And so I just went with the line I've been playing for the last few years now, actually, with h3 and bishop e3. I did a full video on this system for the Dojo YouTube channel, if you haven't seen that, and want some more insights on how to actually play these positions from White's point of view. But yeah, I've had some reasonable success with it, and I still quite like it. So black goes c5, which is one of many moves here. I played d5, going for a Benoni structure. White can also play knight f3, and then the game goes into an accelerated dragon, with white having committed to h3, which maybe might not be the most ambitious move, but it's still an accelerated dragon structure, and I think white can definitely fight for the edge there, you know, like Marazzi bind. But I like the Benoni position, so I played d5, e6, knight f3, e takes d5, and now I decided to take e takes d5, which I've done a lot online. I'm not sure if I've ever had this position OTB, or maybe I have just once or twice. The last game I had to reach this position actually was, well, I'm recording this on January 1st, so it was now last year, but earlier in 2021, at my first tournament of the year, the National Open in June. I had this in a game against Rio Chen. The video should be on this channel if you're curious. And in that game, I played c takes d5, and my opponent played b5, which was a very, very sharp move and leading to some fun complications. White here plays e5, forces black to take, and then take this pawn. I think white is better, but it's quite a sharp game. I was considering going for that as well, but I decided just to switch it up and play e takes d5, because in general, I've always been fond of this structure as well, where it's kind of a symmetrical structure. White has more space, but importantly, black hasn't been able to trade off any pieces. And so typically a lot of black's pieces here kind of fight for, you know, the same d7 square, and that kind of gives white a bit of a space advantage. So rook e8, main move, bishop d3. And here black has like a number of options, like I think knight d7, knight a6 are both normal. Bishop h6 wins a pawn, but I think this is a very dangerous pawn to take, because white will just get the open f-file and then play like a quick queen d2, queen comes to h6, knight g5, open f-file, and it's really, really dangerous. And black can also even sacrifice the exchange here with rook takes e3. There have been a lot of games like this, even at the high level, where for the exchange, black gets the unopposed darks for bishop, which is super strong, and this nice e5 outpost for black's pieces. But I think white is supposed to be better here. I don't think black really gets enough, but it is kind of an interesting way to play it. But my opponent hit me with bishop f5, which was definitely a surprise to say the least. The move seems to break all kinds of strategic principles, mainly just the fact that black allows not just double pawns, but isolated double pawns in front of the king, right? Pretty much like the worst, the worst possible double pawns you can have. And I was trying to think during the game if I had seen this before, and it looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't remember, you know, whether bishop takes f5 is supposed to be good, or if white should just castle, because white doesn't actually mind the trade of bishops if the queen gets to d3. Or maybe if both are good. So at this point, I just started thinking on my own, and I just started making decisions according to my own kind of chess understanding, rather than trying to figure out what did I remember or not remember in this position. And as it turns out, like this move has been played. I would say objectively it's probably a bit dubious, but it has been played by some very strong players. Shirov tried it in a game, way back in, I think it was like 1990 in some interzonal. Granted, he lost that game to Hubner. I have it in my notes, but still, it has been tried at some really, really high levels. And after going through this game, I do feel like it's not the easiest system to crack. So I do end up taking on f5 because I just figured, like, how could I not take? Right? I mean, it just out of principle. White played this move bishop d3. This is a very important move, controlling the e4 square and stopping two of black's main ideas in the position. One is to play knight e4 and trade off the knight. The other is to play bishop f5 to take more control over the e4 square and eventually play knight e4. So bishop d3 is supposed to stop both of these moves. So if black plays bishop f5 anyway, to me, I just felt like out of principle, I have to take this one. That said, if I could do the game over again, I think I might just opt for castling here. I mean, it looks like black kind of gets what they want. It gets to trade the light square bishop without ever allowing white to take on f5, but I still think white is better in this position because we've only traded off one pair of minor pieces. Black's pieces are still a little bit cramped. If black could trade off another pair of knights in this position, then I would think black is fine. For example, they could go knight f d7 or just knight d7, and the bishop opens up and all the pieces have good squares. But with two knights on the board, I do think white is better and just has a simple plan like bishop f4, maybe rook b1, a3, b4, rook f e1. White has a lot of just like natural improving moves they can make and just slowly try to squeeze black. So given how the game went, I feel like this is a much simpler option for white to at least gain some advantage. That said, I ended up taking, which, okay, I think leads to a more interesting game, so that's kind of good. Castles, because f4 was a serious threat. Black plays knight e4, and here I played knight e2. So at this point, I'm way out of book. I'm already thinking on my own here, but I figured it made sense to avoid the trade, not allow black to kind of improve their structure. Although even after fe4, I still think that, black has a lot of weaknesses on the king side. So I even considered like takes knight h2, which I thought was interesting because I want to play like queen h5 and knight g4 and knight h6 check, and black's king side has a lot of weaknesses. But after knight d7, I just couldn't really make anything work. The knight comes to f6 and seems to cover all of the key squares. So I decided to instead avoid the trade and play knight e2. By the way, that game I mentioned, Hubner-Shirov, back from 1990, continued knight takes e4, takes knight d2. And Hubner went on to win. But I don't think he was like necessarily better the whole game or something like that. It's just he ended up winning. Anyway, I go for knight e2. This made sense to me. And there have been quite a few games like this. And so, yeah, this seems to be a very decent way for white to play. I think the Stockfish gives white a decent advantage, something like +1, +0.8. But it's not a real 0.8 because we are kind of like in King's Indian territory. And so I do feel like the engine actually maybe overestimates how weak these pawns are because they really weren't easy to get to in the game. So knight d7, bishop takes b2, I wasn't really worried, just rook b1, rook takes b7. I thought that's a good trade for me. But now I play queen c2 anyway because I think the queen is well developed here. Queen f6, rook b1. And yeah, around here I was starting to realize like this position really isn't so simple for white. Like I have a nice square on f4, but yeah, from there it's not so easy. Black will play like bishop h6, knight e5, and black's pieces do feel very active. Maybe somewhere black goes king h8, rook g8. So really not like a simple position for white, but okay, decide to just play for a pretty typical plan like a3, b4. Maybe somewhere I'll take on c5 and maybe get something on the b file. So here black goes b6. I thought it was a little slow, but turns out to be totally fine. Because anyway, after a3, b4, black will kind of want this move to support the c5 square. I played a3, knight e5. And yeah, here I decide to take. I mean, I don't know, maybe I could have played things a little bit differently here. The engine actually showed a funny line where white can actually even let black take on f3 and double my own pawns, but it turns out good. I think Stockfish was suggesting just a simple knight f4, but in response to knight e5, I would have to play the move rook b e1. Seemingly not caring about black taking on f3, because the point is once I take recapture on f3, then knight has to leave the e4 square. Then after knight g5, king g2, this knight is actually almost trapped. Like white wants to go h4 and starting to win the piece. Black has to play like h6 to give the knight an escape square, and I think the engine suggests rook g1 here and gives white a huge advantage. It actually was considering like going for the structure in the game, but yeah, I kind of talked myself out of it. I'm just like, what was the point of taking on f5 if I'm just going to give my opponent the same exact weaknesses? But it's not really about the pawns here. Here it's more that the black knight loses control over the e4 square and actually gets kicked around quite a bit. And it's white's pieces that can use the king side. You got rook g1 coming, knight h5 ideas. And so looking at it now, of course, it makes sense that white is a lot better. Though it was surprising that the engine thinks white is just like winning here. Of course, black doesn't have to take on f3. Black should probably just build up with something like rook to e7. And then, okay, white is better, but yeah, game continues. Anyway, I end up going a3, knight e5. And now I didn't really want to go back knight e1. I just felt like that's way too passive. So I decide to trade on e5, de5, and I go b4. And I realize this improves black's structure a bit, but I still felt like the structure is actually quite weak. Because these pawns are essentially like hanging pawns. As soon as one of them pushes forward, that's going to be giving up some squares to white's pieces. And now c5 is also a bigger target. Now there's no d6 pawn. So I can actually take on c5 and maybe create a weakness there. So black goes rook a c8. And here I decide to kick the knight with f3, and I go for this position with takes, and f4. But I think I probably missed my last chance to fight for an advantage at this moment. And the strongest move was to play knight to g3, which I actually considered. I thought it was quite interesting because if takes fg, then of course the f5 pawn is a big weakness, and if black plays e4, then the f4 square is now white's, and I think white just has a much better structure here. I can also maybe just play g4 and win the pawn immediately, or at least get some huge pressure. So this one I definitely liked for white. But after knight d6, I wasn't really sure about this position. But it seems like after knight h5 and trading off the bishop and taking on c5, and then white plays this key move f4, this I think would be kind of clearly better for white. Now black has to play f6 here to support the e5 pawn. If black takes or plays e4, then this diagonal is just going to be way too weak. With an unopposed dark square bishop, I think, yeah, black would just have a really tough time defending here. White can also just take it slow, just play for the blockade, like king h2, rook g1, g4. I think it's very, very unpleasant for black, especially because black doesn't really even have a plan in this position. And so after f6, something like rook to b3, and yeah, white just starts shuffling the pieces around, maybe bishop c1, bishop b2, king h2 somewhere. And yeah, it seems like it's a better position for white, like it's kind of harder for black to find decent moves here. So that was, I think, maybe my last chance to fight for any kind of advantage, because after f3, knight d6, takes, I go f4. My idea was, okay, to again try to take on e5 and leave black with some weak pawns, or get black to push e4. But of course, black just goes bishop h6, just pinning the pawn and just keeping the tension, right? Not letting me take on e5 or anything. Now here I felt like was a critical moment, and of course this is where I start to go wrong, because I spent a lot of time here looking at different moves. Like king h2, for example, king h1, like getting out of the check so I can take on e5. But I didn't like either of these. Like king h2, I thought black takes, and then takes on f4. And if I go knight takes f4, then there's rook e4, and this one is hanging. And yeah, I didn't see how to defend this pawn, so this looked really bad. And if I go rook takes f4, then queen e5 just felt unpleasant. Like the knight is under attack, the rook is pinned. If I could play like rook f2 here and start consolidating, then I'm happy I got the open f-file. But no, rook is pinned, the knight is under attack. I think I have to go into another pin here with like rook e1, because the knight can't move either. It's defending the rook on f4. So I didn't like this. I was like, no, too many pins. It's just looked too uncomfortable. Black can like keep building up, knight e4, etc. And so I considered king h1, maybe the king is safer here, but then I didn't like this g3 square is always hanging, like takes, bishop takes f4, maybe rook takes, knight takes, I'm not sure. But eventually black maybe gets knight e4, and then this one is maybe kind of a problem. I wasn't sure, but that's why I just kind of didn't like it. I also consider this like awkward move rook f3, defending the bishop, and I was like, that looks too weird. Eventually I decided on bishop c1, which once I saw this move, I was like, oh yeah, this has to be right. I get the bishop off of the e-file, where it's no longer hanging. I set up bishop b2, which would be a very unpleasant pin, taking advantage of the fact that the bishop is no longer on g7. And yeah, it just looked like a great move to me. But it simply doesn't work out. Now black plays e takes f4, which I was a little bit surprised by, but actually is absolutely correct. And here I realized that like if I go bishop b2, then just queen h4, and queen c3 would be my idea, but just f6. And that's not such a big deal. I can't take on f6 because black will trade, right? And the knight on e2 is hanging. The engine actually points out this move here, knight takes f4, which I did not consider during the game. But okay, it makes a lot of sense, right? Going for this kind of attack. Rook sacrificed, but white obviously has a ton of threats in the position. I think the engine gives a draw here, so it seems like white has not more than a perpetual. But still, maybe that was the way to go, because in the game I end up much worse. So I didn't like the looks of this, because on f6 I was like, I don't know what to do here. The knight is hanging and it doesn't have a great square. And black wants to go like rook e3 and knight e4 next and just take over the position. Like the triple pawns are very ugly, but black's pieces are just way too active. And black has a lot of outposts thanks to these pawns on the f-file, which is kind of surprising. So I end up going king h2. I'm like, let me just get the king out of the way first, because I was also thinking like, okay, I could, if I retake the pawn, then knight takes f4, for example, queen d4 check, and black wins this one. And rook takes f4. I think I could go for this one. I'm not sure why I didn't like it, but I thought it was awkward for some reason. Maybe again, just queen e5. So I end up starting with king h2 just to get out of any checks and force black to like make a move. But this was really dumb, because now black just goes rook e4 immediately, and I just can't defend the pawn. And I legit forgot about this move. I'm not saying it's not like I blundered this move, but like legitimately forgot about it, because I remember I was like calculating this move in so many other variations, and this was always a problem. And then all of a sudden in this position, I like forget to check it, which unfortunate. But yeah, now after rook e4, it seems like everything is collapsing. This knight on d6, super strong. But okay, keep fighting. Bishop b2, queen g6, queen c3, f6. And now I just play knight g1, because I was just like, okay, I'm sick of having my knight hanging on e2. Finally, this was the other point of king h2. I get a square for my knight. Maybe I can come out knight f3, knight h4, just hope for some targets. I was like, I just have to play this move. Now black plays queen g3, which again surprised me, because I felt like black maybe could keep the tension somehow. But okay, the endgame ends up much better for black anyway. So take, knight takes c4. Now black is still one pawn up, because they took this pawn on f4 that I never recaptured. But okay, the pawns are doubled on the f-file. You know, I thought they're quite weak, so I wasn't too worried here. But there are a lot of threats in the position, because knight d2 is a big threat, so I can't take on f6. And rook b8 is also a threat. So if rook takes f5, then rook b8, and the bishop is pinned, and this looked very bad for white, because again, rook f1, knight d2 at least. So I ended up playing bishop c3, which looked like the only move. Maybe bishop c1 was better. Because after bishop c3, actually, I was just expecting knight e3. And I thought this was game over, because the rook is hanging with check. And the d5 pawn is hanging, so I'm losing the d pawn, and that's it. That's the only hope I have in the position, is that this d pawn can create some counterplay. Otherwise, black is just up 2 pawns and has more active pieces. But I thought this was just like game over. The knight comes back to d5, defends everything, f4, and yeah, it's just complete annihilation for white. But I got a little bit lucky here. My opponent goes rook e3 check. I think maybe he rushed a little bit. If I could, the only thing I would criticize about my opponent's playing this game is maybe he was going a little bit too fast, because he was actually playing pretty quick and missing some chances, because he actually lets me completely back into the game. I think knight e3 and it's over. Like I almost have to, like, I'll play a couple more moves here, but I'm gonna resign pretty soon, I think. After rook e3, rook f3, white is still fighting. Black played knight d6 here. This was his idea, wanting to go knight e4 check and defending the f6 pawn indirectly. Now I trade rooks, and I was expecting bishop takes e3, where I was going to continue king f3 to get out of the check. And I thought, okay, I'm clearly much worse here. I'm down a pawn, but it's only one pawn. You know, I was still feeling optimistic that maybe I could at least hold it, maybe save it. because during the middle game I felt like I'm just lost there. So at this point I'm like, okay, at least it's trending upwards. But on rook takes e3, my opponent starts thinking, and I realize, oh, he has f4 check, which this one I did blunder, I didn't see at all. And he ends up playing it, but it actually might not have been a great decision for him, which is very surprising. So I play king f3. Actually, I don't know if I should have done this one. I think king g4 would have been better. Because after king f3 takes, I go knight e2 and I play for the blockade. But had I played king g4 here after takes, then I can just take the f6 pawn. Because when the king's on f3, there's rook f8 and the bishop is lost. Now this one just intuitively I didn't like because I was just like leaving the e-pawn, but as it turns out actually knight e2 is coming anyway and there's not a whole lot that black can do here. So yeah, maybe that was a little bit better, but okay, king f3 takes knight e2. Now black really should have played f5 to stop white from playing g4, so that at least black can like trade off the pawn, but instead black goes rook to e8. And okay, I still can't take the pawn because of rook f8, but now white gets g4 in, and now this pawn is firmly blockaded, and it's actually not that easy for black to make progress. So that's why this f4 check, although it looks very nice, black undoubles the pawn and gets this like super powerful passed e-pawn. I think actually it was like a strategic mistake, which is very, very surprising. And honestly, if I was black in this position, I feel like I'd probably go f4 as well, right? It's just such a tempting move. You open up the f5 square, it just looks so good. So I really can't blame my opponent for playing this one. But yeah, bishop takes was objectively stronger because here the bishop just ends up being more active. So what happens in the game is I get this blockade, and now it's actually very hard for black to improve their position. The knight on d6 looks good, but as soon as it moves, the rook will invade with rook to b7. So king f7, h4, and I'm just kind of sitting and just holding my position. And this is maybe the one phase where I'm kind of happy with my play of the game, these like few moves here. Rook e7, rook to b8, I activate my rook. Now I have ideas, maybe rook a8, rook h8, and so on. Also, rook d8 is a very annoying move, breaking black's blockade and then trying to run because the d pawn is still on the board. So black goes rook to d7, and now knight g3. Now the knight moves, now that black doesn't have any e2 check, e2 ideas, e2 knight takes e2, rook e3 check, this kind of thing. So knight g3, now I want to play knight h5, maybe knight f5 somewhere if the knight moves, knight e4, etc. And yeah, at this point I'm actually starting to feel ambitious. I'm like, man, I'm not even worse here. I mean, I'm down a pawn, I don't have like a ton of threats, but I don't think I'm worse because the pieces are really active and the knight is coming to h5. And indeed, the trend does change quite a bit here. Black goes bishop f8, and now I play knight h5. I could already take the pawn, but then knight c4 check, and black is likely to win this one. If king e4, I think black can just repeat like with knight d6, or maybe even take on a3. So I didn't want to give up the d pawn. Instead, I just wanted to keep the pressure, and I go knight h5. And yeah, now black has to be very, very precise here because I just want to take on f6 with the knight, go g5, or take here, take on h7, bishop on f8 is under attack. So some real counterplay. Black ends up going f5, which was the best move, just trading off the weakness. And here I spent, I think, my remaining time, because I was approaching time trial, but I had like maybe 5-10 minutes at this point. This is like move 39. I ended up going knight f6. I don't think white really has more than various ways to draw the game, or at least keep the game equal. But all right, this one looked like the safest, or at least the one where I can at least, pose some problems, but still I thought white should be fine. F takes g4 check was played. I go knight takes g4. Now knight e5 check is a big threat. So black played bishop g7, and I didn't see anything better than just trading. King takes, and now knight takes e3. And once we got here, I had like such a feeling of relief, because I was like, wow, I'm 100% not worse. I'm not even down a pawn anymore. If anything, I thought white is even better because my king is a little bit more active, my rook is a little bit more active, and so on. Though I thought, okay, probably it should still be equal. But it did look like, maybe black could somehow go wrong here. He does start with rook f7 check, and I play king to g4. And yeah, I'm not sure if I should have done this one. I think maybe the king should go around e2, d3, go this way. Because I was trying to keep my king kind of more active and very, very much hoping for this one, which I think was overly optimistic. because after rook e7, I get to play knight f5 check, trade off the knights, and this is just like a trivially winning rook endgame because the d-pawn is running, the king is more active, and yeah, that's it. The d-pawn is just going to cost black the rook. But this was very optimistic because my opponent way too strong to allow such a rook endgame. Instead, he goes king f6, which is a much better move. And yeah, here I just kind of lose my mind a bit. I was like thinking, oh, rook d8, he wants to go king e7. And maybe I should start with rook a8, but then I was like, I don't know. And then I was thinking, oh, maybe I can go king f4. But then king e7 comes with check. And if king e5, there's rook f3, which looked annoying because black's rook gets very active. And then I was thinking, oh, maybe I'll go rook d8, king e7, rook a8, attacking this pawn. And then I thought, like, okay, probably black has to play king f6. And like now I'll play king f4. And now I thought it's kind of like a better version because the rook has the 7th rank now. Earlier, rook b7 check was not a threat. Here, if king e7, king e5, rook f3, I have rook takes a7 check. This was impossible with the rook on b8. And then my king gets in, and I think, yeah, probably winning. So that was kind of like my idea, but I didn't take like a closer look at the position or a fresh look. So I end up going rook to d8, and then black just plays king e5. It's just like, I'm like, oh no. And like slowly I realized that like I've completely messed it up. And in fact, things get so bad here because black's king activates so strongly that in fact white is just lost. Like I started spending a few minutes here because we're after the time control, and the more I looked at the position, the less I liked white's chances, because all of a sudden I realized I have no counterplay, and black just has a super strong c-pawn. If the rook moves off the d-file, then the king just comes in with like king to e4. And yeah, now it's my king that's actually sidelined by this rook on f7. And black's construction is actually just perfect. Like beautiful king on e5, knight on d6, rook on f7, defending everything. I just have literally no counterplay, nothing, no way to even attack any of black's pawns. So yeah, real bummer. I mean, I just totally blundered this move, king to e5. I was thinking back to during the game. I think it's just because like, you know, I just went too quickly. You know, I just rushed things. I saw rook d8. I thought, oh, his idea is king e7. And then I didn't really think beyond that. Or I mean, I thought deeper, but I didn't really think about black's other options. And so, yeah, very unfortunate. Because like I mentioned, white now is just losing. If I advance the king, then rook f3 is very annoying, hitting the knight, hitting the pawn, threatening knight f7 check, and white is losing at least 1 or 2 pawns here. So yeah, not really a whole lot I can do. I end up going king h5 to avoid knight f7 check, and now I was kind of expecting like rook f3, and I thought that's good, but c4, I think even simpler. Like black doesn't even allow anything. Just the rook stays on the 7th rank, he just improves his position, and like I have nothing to do. So here black realized, you know, like white has no plan, so he doesn't even have to do anything too quick, just advancing the pawn. I played rook a8 here, c3. I actually might have gotten the move order wrong. I might have started with rook a8 and then played king h5, but it doesn't make a huge difference because c3 happens. And now this pawn is just very strong. If I play knight c2, of course, I'm losing this one. Rook f2 is happening anyway. And yeah, things are just bad. So I play king h6. Okay, just trying to latch onto the pawn, but now king f4. And at this point, okay, knight is under attack. And if I move my knight, let's say to knight c2, then black actually has a choice of mating nets. Then I realize he can go king g4, threatening knight f5 mate. And then if knight e3 check or rook j8 check or something, just king takes h4. And basically it's hopeless. This is a huge threat. Black is now threatening like c2, knight takes c2, knight f5 mate. Or even simpler, maybe black can just play knight f5 check, king h5, and rook f6. And yeah, I didn't see a defense here either because rook h6 is coming, and yeah, that's mate as well. So given that my opponent had 2 choice of mating nets after king f4, I decided like, okay, yeah, I just decided to resign here. So yeah, very, very painful game and really, really difficult one too. You know, I think had I lost the game, let's say back here on move 29, if my opponent just played knight e3 in this position and then just won, then I don't think it would have been that upsetting because I would just feel like, okay, the opponent played super, super well. He just outplayed me, you know, totally deserved win. what can I do? I can learn from this game, but that's it. No reason to be like really upset about the result. Although I didn't play well in the first part either. But it's because I kind of like got back into the game and actually started feeling like, oh man, I have chances, not just to draw anymore, but I have chances maybe to win the game. I think that's what really stung in the end, because I end up just blundering horribly here with rook d8, and yeah, not just losing the game, but really kind of ruining the whole tournament. Because of course, when you lose to a much lower rated player, it really kills your rating performance and everything. So yeah, really, really painful moment, especially because I felt like, I had been doing reasonably well in the event, like playing pretty good until this game. And if I had drawn this game, so of course the right move, I don't know if I mentioned, was to play king f4 here, and that stops black from activating the king. And then things are just equal, like king e7, king g4, and we might even just like repeat the position because neither side can really do much. But yeah, had I drawn this game, I would have felt much better about the tournament overall. I would have played the last game. I don't think I would have had like great chances for like a prize or anything, but I would have just played the last game and tried to finish with a win, get 6 out of 9, and I think that would have been a perfectly normal result. But yeah, losing this game, especially in such a fashion, yeah, really just left kind of a bad taste in my mouth, because I did feel like I was playing reasonably well up until this point. But yeah, that's unfortunate. Sometimes you lose focus for one moment, literally, and it not only ruins the game, but yeah, just kills your whole tournament. It's kind of the brutality of OTB tournament chess, but at this point, I'm kind of used to it. So yeah, looking back at the tournament, like I mentioned, I felt like I actually played reasonably well. And especially, the 2 games I lost, definitely I have some room to work on there, especially there are a couple times throughout the tournament where, I got a position out of the opening that I basically never played before, OTB. And so even though I kind of understood some ideas, I didn't have that like experience that you get from actually playing the position out against a strong player. So I definitely feel like I need to play a lot more chess and get a lot more experience in the coming months. And then the games I won, I felt like were fairly convincing. I was hardly worse in any of them. I don't think actually I was ever in trouble. And for the most part, I thought I played pretty well and didn't miss too many things in those games from what I remember. Then I had this one draw against Alice Lee, who lower rated player, but after analyzing the game, she made very, very few mistakes. I only had like one chance maybe to win it. So I didn't really feel too bad about not winning that game. I thought it was a pretty fair result, especially because she had some winning chances there as well. So yeah, if it wasn't for this game, I would say like pretty decent tournament in terms of my play, but this one really kind of spoiled it all, which is a shame. And it does make me think, because actually, so I had 3 tournaments last year, all in Vegas. National Open, Vegas Open, and now North American Open. And in each of these 3 events, I ended up losing 1 game to a lower rated player. That really hurt my tournament. In the National Open, it happened in round 1, which was quite demoralizing, but I ended up bouncing back and I think having a decent event. And in the Vegas Open, it happened in the middle of the event. I think it was round 6. I lost to a player who was around like 2,200, so a little bit higher. At the first tournament, the player I lost to was also around 2,100, like in this case. And yeah, I think moving forward, it's something I really have to improve, because I don't think you can afford to lose very many games to not just lower rated players, but like greatly much lower rated, like 200, 300 points, especially not 1 game every tournament. I think that's way too much. So I have to do some reflection, maybe about my focus during the games. It's also possible that, I'm just like, not being careful enough against lower rated players, or maybe being too optimistic. That said, that was one of the things I was actively thinking about during the tournament. In every one of my games against lower rated players, I was like really trying to focus myself before the game, and really treating the game as seriously as I could. In fact, I even imagine like every one of my opponents was like a grandmaster. Like, I'm going to play a really strong player and I want to get the most out of this game. And so I really felt like I put a lot of effort into the games against lower rated players. But clearly not enough, or maybe this round was just not my round. But yeah, moving forward, I do need to reduce the number of these types of games to as few as possible, ideally 0. Yeah, I definitely feel like I need to work on not just my openings, but like my understanding of a lot of these middle games to kind of feel them on a much deeper level. All right, guys, I think that's going to be it for this video and this series. So thanks very much for tuning in and supporting and following as always. I imagine this video is going to be quite a bit longer, but hopefully that's all right. It makes up for missing round 9. And yeah, moving forward, I'm actually going to be playing again in about 2.5 weeks at the Golden State Open, which is going to be, I think, a 7-round open tournament. So no norms available, but I think it'll be quite a strong open tournament, probably some grandmasters. And so, yeah, I'm mainly just going to try to play just to get a lot more experience. And then in 2022, the plan is to try to play a lot of high-level events. I would love to go visit some big opens, maybe even travel to Europe at some point. The only thing is that, you have to book your travel usually way ahead of time, way in advance. And with COVID, things still feel kind of unpredictable. So I'm very nervous about booking, a travel somewhere, some tournament, and then having to end up canceling, because that would be really unfortunate. So I'm not really sure where exactly I will be playing, the rest of the year over the summer, but I do hope to get quite a few high-level events in. That means I'll be training a lot, studying a lot, trying to improve my chess. I'm also, as you guys know, have been making a ton of content for ChessDojo. I would say Dojo is probably my main focus and project these days, outside of obviously my own chess. Yeah, definitely going to be doing a lot more lessons and videos for Dojo moving forward, and probably doing some training on the channel, stream some training games or some calculation work in the future. I think that's definitely going to happen. All right, guys. Well, that's, I think, going to wrap it up for this video. Thanks again for watching, and hopefully I'll catch you in future videos. Take care.